Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Discovery Season 1, Episode 9, Into the Forest I Go. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Discovery, so I have to start with the spoiler warning for Discovery up to the mid-season finale. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So, yeah, this is a pretty good episode. Last week I talked about how last week's episode was way overhyped. Like, they had a writer come on the after show and be like, oh, this episode is going to make you cry, it's going to be amazing, it's going to turn the tables, and the episode is actually kind of meh. It's kind of bland. But at the end of that after show, they then hyped up this episode saying, oh, this is the best, going to be one of the greatest episodes ever, and it's going to, they name drop the name Balance of Terror. So they're saying this is going to be the Balance of Terror of Discovery. Now, so did I think that was overhyped? Yes. Do I think it was as overhyped as last week's episode? No, because I actually think this was a good episode, whereas last week's was kind of just like a, it wasn't a horrible episode, but it was kind of average. But this week's episode, I would say, was on the plus side, or on the good side. But was it Balance of Terror? Nah, I think that's overhyping it. Because Balance of Terror was this epic sort of cat and mouse game. This relationship formed between Kirk and the Romulan commander, even though they never met, because they formed this relationship through their chase and through their battle. And you had this, journey of the two people going after each other. Whereas I don't think it was quite the same thing here. There wasn't quite a journey. To me, this is like, it was almost like the heist film, which you never see in heist films, but it was like the heist film where you see them planning everything out, and they're planning the steps of the heist, and then they go and do the heist, and everything goes as planned. There's a reason why you never see that. That never happens in heist films, because it's either you don't see them planning, you just see them executing the plan, and everything goes as planned, like Ocean's 11, or you see them planning, but then everything goes wrong, and they have to improvise, and nothing goes according to plan. So that's usually the two things that happen in heist films. Where as this, they took sort of the method the heist films always avoid, because it's too planned and predictable, is you see them planning and everything goes as planned. But I will say, I do think it worked for this episode. I do think, there were a few snags here and there, like things didn't really, especially with Lieutenant Tyler, breaking down with the PTSD, that was definitely a snag, unpredictable. And but for the most part, it went to plan. Vernon did have to improvise and fight Cole, of House Core, which wasn't part of the plan. But ultimately, Discovery was able to do what it needed to do. They were able to map everything, and they were able to, so pretty much went according to plan. But I actually think it was cool the way they worked. I thought it would have been a bit too cliches if everything went wrong or whatever like this. I'm actually glad it sort of went according to plan, and I think it was an exciting episode. It was maybe one of my favorite. I don't know if I'm ready to say my favorite of the season, but it's definitely up there. It was definitely one of the most effectively intense that tells a complete story from start to finish. Was it Balance of Terror? No. No. But it was still good. It was still definitely good for Discovery. It wasn't perfect. There were still some sort of issues here and there, but for the most part, quite enjoyed this episode. So, it starts with, this Vulcan admiral we've seen before telling Lorca not to, just to go away and not protect the inhabitants of the planet, and it was pretty obvious that he was going to disobey, and I kind of liked how he disobeyed. It's kind of a callback to Star Trek 6 and stuff, where Sulu and Kirk were always given orders by Starfleet, and they were just like, bleh, let's just do what we want, which is less common in Next Generation times. And in fact, I think there was a Voyager episode that talked about how this time period with the original series was more of cowboys, sort of, there wasn't, Starfleet wasn't as everywhere. It was more frontier-like, I suppose. Whereas in Next Generation times, you couldn't get away with disobeying Starfleet like that. So I do like that. You see the callback. You see and why the Admiral even bothers giving orders, because when Lorca does disobey, because he's happy with the results, it's like, oh, it's okay, it's all forgiven. He gives him a medal. Whatever. It's totally in keeping with Star Trek. Star Trek is, there's been lots of examples like that. So I thought that was pretty cool. So, and of course, it was great how they weren't just going to abandon that planet. Now, I actually thought that the race of peaceful energy thingy, or whatever the hell they were on the planet, was actually going to have a hand in brokering peace between Federation and Klingons, but I suppose that would be a bit too much like Errand of Mercy. And people last week were saying they got the Errand of Mercy vibe, but I was like, to me, it was like they were setting up for it, but they actually didn't follow through. Instead, they had this battle episode, and those aliens were, apparently they were just idiots. They were naive for inviting the Klingons, but they were talking about how, we're going to help you make peace. So I actually thought they were going to use some magical powers or whatever to actively try to bring them together, kind of like Errand of Mercy, but they didn't go that route well. And I am a bit disappointed they didn't play more of a part, but I think if they would have done another Errand of Mercy, that would have been repetitive and I wouldn't have liked it. So I actually do like the way that they went here. Now, of course, you got Saru, who of course made a huge connection with these creatures, was really hard up when he thought Lorca was going to leave. It's like he was calling for them to disobey Starfleet, which is really interesting because Saru's usually not one to disobey Starfleet. So, I mean, he was like, we can't just leave this innocent species to die, kind of like, kind of like what he did with the fucking tardigrade, ordering it to be tortured until it's killed. Anyway, sorry. Never gonna let that go. See, he's a freaking hypocrite. Fucking, let's forget Saru's a goddamn hypocrite. Anyway, sorry, let's move on from that. So then they had this plan where, it would take like days for them to map out the Klingon cloak or whatever. And of course, part of the plan involves sending, people officers over to the ship to map it out. Fine, whatever. But part of the plan is that Discovery has to do 127 jumps. Otherwise, it would take like 2 days to map out the cloak and the ships. But if they do 127 jumps, they can do it as long as it takes to do the 127 jumps, which is, I don't know, a couple hours, I don't know. And of course, like, doing so would have a huge effect on Stamets. Oh, and I also really liked, and especially they showed this on the previous one, how Stamets was lying to Dr. Colburn and everyone about how much this has been affecting him, and Lorca sort of orders him to go to sickbay and to get tested because Lorca wants to have a backup to show Starfleet to be like, oh, we couldn't jump back because this is hurting Stamets or whatever, and he got his more than he bargained for. And I like the way the Colburn said that. It's like, well, you got more than you bargained for. You're actually right. This is really hurting him, and I love the position that this puts Stamets in, how Lorca had to give him this pep talk. And I do think Lorca was being a genuine here. To a degree, I do think there's some manipulation involved. I do think Lorca is a bit shady. But some people, I think, are making him come out more shady than he is. I don't think he's completely full of shit. I think that he was reaching out to him genuinely about, look, let's get this war done and over with so we can get back to doing what we're meant to be doing, exploring. And I do love that they're touching on this. So I thought that was a pretty good scene. But then they jumped all those times, and seeing the toll on Stamets was pretty tense. It sort of added to the tension. Although I don't really get, it seems like meaningless, contrived technobabble that they just do because it's convenient for the plot of them jumping 127 times. That's a shitload of times, and I don't really think, it doesn't really seem logical, like they would actually need to do it that many times. But whatever, plot convenience. Moving on. So we get the away mission with Burnham and Tyler being into the Klingon ship, and I love how, of course we know Tyler's going to go because she's the main character and she has to go, but I love how Lorca didn't want her to go and she had to sort of talk him into it, and I think it made sense because he sees her as his biggest asset, and he doesn't want to put that asset at risk. Now, when they chose Tyler, like at the very start, when they first chose him, I'm like, well, maybe why is that such a good idea? This guy was just in prison for 7 months, long ass time. Like none of his compatriots survived. And so it was a really harrowing experience. We know he was abused, and he was had a lot of sort of issues from that. So I thought it was a pretty, I was questioning Lorca's. I know he's head of security, but still in this particular situation, I was questioning Lorca's decision to send him over, because he could very well be thrown right back into prison, and this could conjure up sort of feelings for him, and my concerns are proven totally and completely 100% dead right, because that's exactly what happens to him when he's over there. He suffers his breakdown from PTSD and becomes completely immobile and can't do anything, and the whole time this is happening, I'm thinking, well, duh, why not? You should have known this would happen. Don't send them there. But whatever. Of course, it was the Klingon woman who sort of triggered this breakdown. But I'm gonna get back to this shortly. But I want to talk about how they've discovered Cornwell's alive, and I'm happy that she's alive. I was worried after last week's episode that she'd be dead, but I do think this wasn't handled very well, particularly last week's episode, because they were just talking like she was dead. They were saying that she was definitely dead, and they brought her in the room with the dead bodies. And this episode, oh, she's alive, here, and acting like she was always alive. They were trying to pretending like they never said she was dead. So this doesn't make sense. I know you could just say that the Klingon woman was lying to Cole, and he wasn't, that she was, by saying she was dead and she wasn't really dead, but there were. There's more to it than that. It was just really vague and didn't make sense, and I don't know. But I'm happy she's alive. I just think this could have been handled better. So she's there, and it's interesting that she has a background in psychology, so she was there to sort of talk Tyler down or try to calm him when he was suffering this breakdown. So, yeah, that was interesting. And I actually did like the Burnham running around the Klingon ship trying to set off the things. Now, someone else pointed this out, and this is what I was thinking. Alright, so they had these big cingular devices that they need to set up, 2 of them on the ship, and when they set up the first one, it was like an empty, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a pretty empty room, empty space, and that's why I thought it was being it was having these bright lights everywhere, and it was going, transmitting to Discovery, very loud. And then Burnham goes on the bridge and sets up the other one, and it's being go and shooting these bright lights and being, we are now transmitting really loud when there's freaking Klingons right there. I'm like, how are they not hearing this? I don't know, maybe I misunderstood the scene, maybe they weren't that nearby, but it seemed like that's such a stupid thing. I almost expected Burnham to go, shh, quiet, shut up. I mean, really, that seemed a bit silly of them to have a thing like that, but whatever. I really did like the fight scene, the whole interactions between Burnham and Cole. I thought this was amazing. Now, some people are complaining about Cole dying so early because it seems like they're just going through Klingons like crazy, like T'Kuvma and Cole, but I'm fine. I don't have any issues with that whatsoever. I am perfect. I think this was a great death. It was a great way it played out. I love the communicator with the universal translator, so they communicate. Now, I do have to briefly talk about how some people really complained about how the Klingons always speak Klingons, and they hear them speaking English in this episode, they should have been speaking English the whole time. I still completely and utterly and totally disagree. I love the fact they were speaking Klingon. I think that added to the authenticity of them being aliens. And I love the fact that they're speaking English here because it makes sense. There's Universal Translator. And I love how they're using Universal Translator correctly because in the original series, there wasn't really a device. They were just, everyone was speaking English, and the writers were like, well, Pete, why are these aliens speaking English? And then that audience is going to raise questions like, oh, let's just say there's something called the Universal Translator that automatically translates everything, whatever. It was an excuse. This is a blanket excuse. In fact, I knew someone in like Next Generation Deep Space Nine, whenever we watched that, and a Klingon said something in Klingon, she would always be like, oh, the Universal Translator's malfunctioning, is breaking, because it should automatically translate that. So the Universal Translator is always just a shitty excuse to why everyone's speaking English. But Enterprise started handling it more realistically because it was like pre-Universal Translator, and they actually had to translate things. And that was actually a nice touch, and I like how they're doing that here, even though it's not consistent with original series canon, but again, that canon was kind of dumb in the first place. So I do like how they had the Universal Translator and they were actually able to communicate on terms. And I love how Burnham, again, is showing her specialty, how she understands other cultures. I mean, she's more of a scientist than a sociologist, but still, she like understands the Klingons' sense of honor. And the Klingons really came off as Klingons. Even though they still look like Uruk-hai, the fighting Uruk-hai, or like monsters or whatever, they were for once they're actually behaving like Klingons in this episode, like with the honor. And when Burnham like outright, she didn't say I challenge you to the fight, but she was basically getting down to that. But that's how Cole took it. He's like, I accept your challenge because it's part of Klingon culture that you can challenge someone to a fight to the death, and so he took that as that. For him, it was a win-win because he was 100% sure that he would win, and therefore he would kill the person who killed the Tuvma, and that would make him look more like a hero. So he loved the fact that Burnham challenged him to a fight. Now, I was just watching the after show, and they were talking about how it was great that Burnham like won the fight and kicked Cole's ass, but she didn't really. Actually, because she beamed away, and that's not how Cole died. The way Cole died was the Discovery blowing up the ship while he was still on it. So I actually get the impression that if she stayed, she probably would have lost the fight. I mean, otherwise she wouldn't just have left like that. But she was a good enough fighter to keep him occupied and not die until Discovery was ready to beam her away. And I love that. I love the fight. It was a very intense scene that made me appreciate this Burnham character a lot more. And we get the call back to her Vulcan, martial arts, or whatever. So it showed that she was a competent fighter, was able to hold her own against the Klingon. They had, the mechless and the common like Klingon way of battling. It was very in keeping with like Klingon culture, and just an overall great scene. And the way like she like beamed away, she jumped in the air and they beamed her away. I was so good, so well done. Oh, now another thing I forgot to mention I thought was really cool, and again, this is breaking original series canon, but in a way that who cares because it's better, is they had those life sign masks where even Next Generation Deep Space Nine times didn't have this stuff, which they should have, because it makes so much sense that they could beam over there and just pretend, and it would automatically mask them as being Klingons. I mean, I don't mind when they break canon when they do stuff that's actually really this should have been in there in the first place, to put it that way. So overall, I really loved that. I thought this played out very well. Very intense, great fight scene, of course. When Lorca finally got the coordinates, whatever, the cloaking device, and they were able to fire on it. Very reminiscent of Star Trek VI, when Kirk and Sulu find out that there was a cloak ship attacking them that could fire while cloak, and they got the coordinates and were able to fire, and they were like, fire! It was very reminiscent like that when Lorca was able to sort of fire on the cloak ship. Which is which is great. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Oh, they're ripping off Star Trek 6. No, it's a nice homage. I like the callback. I think it had enough originality to it that really worked. Really enjoyed it. Thought it was great. But let's get to Tyler now, because you have this thing where he's like suffering from PTSD, and basically he was raped repeatedly. And I do like the dynamic that they're having, a male character who's raped repeatedly by a female character, they're handling it with care, I would say it that way, and they were sort of saying that they're not like keeping two gender stereotypes. And I think that works really well. Now, I do have to talk about the elephant in the room about the theory that Tyler is Voq, which I am still 100% on board. In fact, I am more on board with this theory than I've ever been before. Now, some people might think that this episode was confirmation that wasn't, because he generally, he wasn't faking that trauma. He generally suffered trauma, but to me, this only proves that he is a Manchurian candidate type situation where he doesn't remember that he's actually Voq. He actually believes that he's this human named Ash Tyler, but there's no way in hell that he is. And I think I can't remember her name, Laurel or whatever the Klingon woman's name is. Her reaction to seeing him, I think it totally gives it away. It doesn't make much sense, and if in the context that this is Ash Tyler, but if in the context this is Voq, makes perfect sense to me that the way when she first sees him, she's like, "Oh, you!" and she actually feels happy to see him again. Now, some people might say, "Oh, that's because she had a crush on this Lieutenant Tyler guy," but I think nonsense. It's because it's Voq. And later, when Tyler goes to visit her in the brig, she's like, "Oh, I won't let them hurt you," or something like that. It's so obvious that it's Voq. It's gotta be Voq. There's no doubt in my mind now that it is, because I think it's the whole Superman Clark Kent thing. We were following Voq's storyline for the first couple episodes, and then we didn't see him again, and then we saw Lieutenant Tyler, and then we never see Voq after that. It's the same person. It definitely is. Not a single doubt. So I think the trauma, he generally believes that, and that's real, but it's because he doesn't realize that he's Voq. Now, whether or not this trauma was implanted or it actually did occur, and she did sort of torture him, and maybe, that would explain because Voq and Laurel, whatever her name is, were actually in love, so maybe that's why she had that connection to him. But of course, if she still did do that against his will, then that is still rape technically. But I don't know. Maybe those memories are just implanted and they're not real at all. So it'll be interesting to see how this sort of relationship is developed and goes from now on. But yeah, I think they have to reveal that it is. Now, I do have to talk about this one thing, because I heard some people complaining, "Oh, we saw Klingon boobs, that's so, oh my god, they're showing boobs, they're just doing that for sex appeal and ratings." Oh, who cares? I'm sorry, I had to mention it. Who cares? I barely even noticed that. I wouldn't even remember it unless someone pointed it out and be like, "Oh, there was Klingon boobs." Oh yeah? Well, it just made sense for the scene. It made sense in the context of the scene. It didn't seem out of place. It didn't seem like they were perfect. I talked about this, my Game of Thrones and Enterprise comparisons before. The Enterprise, even though we didn't actually see any nudity, it was so out of place. It was so obvious, especially the stupid decon chamber when they put the sexy oil and they rub each other. That was so obvious. It was so bad. It was so contrived we have to make this sexy. Where this didn't come off that way at all. At all. I barely even noticed it, because it made perfect sense for the scene, for the context of what's going on. So I completely disagree. I think that's nonsense. Who cares if you see more nudity or whatever, as long as it makes sense for the story. Whereas the Enterprise stuff was so goddamn obvious ploy, contrived ploy that didn't fit at all. But anyway, side rant there. And when we get those flashbacks, though, of the trauma, it could actually, some of those, I'd have to go back and freeze frame it or whatever, that Lieutenant Tyler's having of, his experiences with Rel. Some of it might actually be when he was Vogue. And it might be sort of hinting at, like, some of his previous memories might be seeping in and making him realize that he was Vogue. And maybe, we see Tyler is the one having sex with her, but maybe it was actually a callback to Vogue having sex with her. He's just remembering it wrong. I don't know. I think that's the case. Anyway, so the episode ends where they go into, where are they? They have no idea. It's so obvious it's a parallel universe. It is so obvious it's a parallel, because they name drop parallel universe early in the episode when, Lorca was talking to Stamets, and they're like, oh, we find this warp drive, it actually could connect to parallel universe. So obvious that's what happened here. So obvious. And I would even go as far as say this is going to be the mirror universe, because, well, going outside of the lore of the show, we know that earlier they made announcements that Discovery would be visiting the mirror universe this season. So I don't have any doubt in my mind. But plus, they did that such, like, obvious contrived foreshadowing, and I can't remember which episode it was, but it was earlier this season where Stamets was looking in the mirror and he saw this other sort of reflection going with the evil smile. Mirror, mirror universe, get it, get it, get it. So obviously it's foreshadowing that you're going to do a mirror universe, which to me seems like just another contrived sort of TOS callback, just like the whole Harry Mudd thing. But whatever, I'll reserve judgment until I see it. I think it was a pretty good cliffhanger. I'm happy with it, and I'm interested to see where they take it going forward from here. So, my rating for Into the Forest I Go out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. This was a really good episode. Really enjoyed it. Not quite 9 or 10 material, I'm sorry to say. In fact, none of the episodes in Discovery, as of yet, I would say are 9 or 10 material, but hopefully it will get there eventually. Because, as exciting as it was, as I said, it's basically a heist. See it planned out, and it goes according to plan for the most part. I mean, a few snags here and there, but for the most part, it goes according to plan. So that is not the dynamic cat and mouse and thing like Balance of Terror. So I think such a comparison is a bit too much. But it wasn't like the best thing ever, but it was, for the most part, played out very well and executed well. And I loved the fight scene between Burnham and Cole, and then seeing Burnham and Tyler hook up at the end was really interesting, especially since we know that Tyler is Vogue. Definitely, we know that. Anyway, so that's it for my review of Star Trek Discovery, Season 1, Episode 9, which is the end of the half season. We'll be back in a couple of months, I believe, with more Star Trek Discovery. So I do have an announcement. I will be doing a live discussion video with my brother Atkin Tomko over on his channel, his YouTube channel, Atkin Tomko, which will be next Saturday at 8 p.m. That's East Coast time in the U.S., which for me, I believe, is Sunday at 2 p.m. here in New Zealand, but you can check the time zone, whatever. I don't have the link yet, but when I do, I will put it in the description below, so you definitely join us, check us out as we talk about the first half of Star Trek Discovery. And also check out my channel as I do many other reviews on other shows, like I cover all the other Star Trek shows, and also Game of Thrones, Mr. Robot, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.